Yo, what it do, everybody? Your favorite anti-hero is back with another video. For those who don't know me, I am the Pepperoni, and here I don't typically like to throw shade, but I do enjoy sprinkling pepper. Because I care. In this video, I'm going to be doing the book roast for Montenegro, Book 2, Dark Serenade, by the author Estela Vasquez Perez. This video will have lots and lots of spoilers for this book. Lots of spoilers for this book. Let's just dive on in. So something rather remarkable happened when I was reading this book, and I have to do a bit of a shout out to a previous video that I made. Okay, so when I was doing my book roast for this novel, Delusions, by the author Amy, I gave her a really hard time about how many times she's put the name San Francisco in her book. And I actually did a bit of a quiz game where I was like, guess how many times the name was found in the book? I'll tell you at the end of the video. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a new champion. The eloquent Estela Vasquez Perez has dethroned Amy as the San Francisco champion. So, guess how many times this author puts the name San Francisco in this book? And I will tell you at the end of the video how many times it's in here. Maybe you'll get it right, maybe you won't, we'll see. The book starts where the first book left off, which is this random ass plague happening in New Orleans in 1853. It serves no purpose in the story. Like, it just kind of happens at the end of book 1, and then it's over at the beginning of book 2, so okay. Of course, this book has more head hopping, like in the first book. For example, on page 1, it says Victor is not concerned about becoming another victim. So that's from his perspective. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines later, it says Henrietta fears that if Victor dies, blah, blah, blah. So now we're inside Henrietta's head, looking at what she's afraid of. I don't know who to experience this situation from this perspective. The worst case of head hopping is in chapter 9, the first show, their first show. From 70 to 71. I mean, it is just jumping from Victor to Julieta to Carlo. I mean, all over the place. Bottom of 70. It says, Victor's enchanting eyes, admiring her, give her the confidence to continue her performance. So that's Julieta's perspective. Next sentence. Blinded by the spotlight, Julieta cannot clearly see the audience, but she can feel their presence, encompassing her with adoration. So that's Julieta's perspective. A little bit further down, now we're talking about Carlo's perspective. It says, as a performer himself, he is not a stranger to the stage his love is now singing from, and he is very aware of the spot where Victor is standing, and thus he knows that when Julieta looks in that direction, she is doing so to make eye contact with Victor. It burns Carlo to see Julieta seek out Victor for encouragement. So that's his perspective. A little bit further down, it says, Victor wants Julieta to benefit as much as she can from the adoring audience, who are on their feet, joyously clapping. A little bit further down, it says, her step back makes Victor fear that the overwhelming love of her public will make her swoon, so Victor joins her on the stage, his hands still clapping. I feel like that's not worded properly, but you get the point. Now it's in Victor's perspective. And then, like 2 sentences later, it says Carlo's hands are burning from his clapping. So now we're in Carlo's perspective. Like, damn. A subtle little thing. This is mentioned in the first book, and it's also referenced here in the second book. It's something really cool, really unique. This idea that if a vampire doesn't get enough blood, they basically become zombies. And so I'm guessing that's like what we all think of as zombies. So essentially, the fictional character of the zombie is really, they're all vampires. It's just they're vampires that have gone too long without blood, and so they've like devolved into this mindless, bloodthirsty, creature. But it does, as cool as that is, it'd be cool to see it. It'd be cool to see it in the story. Like there's no zombies in the story. It'd be cool if, you know, there was a horde of zombies and the zombies existed because there was like a pack of vampires that were, basically surrounded in a war by the werewolves in the past or something. And maybe because the werewolves prevented the vampires from getting blood for so long that they turned into the zombies. They kind of like starved them out. I don't know, something like that. That'd be really cool. That'd be something really neat. And I kind of feel like it's a missed opportunity so far. Maybe it'll pop up in the third book. But so far, it's been a missed opportunity because it's something cool. Also, something to think about is if you, adventured into that, author Estella Vasquez Perez, what would happen if the zombies got enough blood? Is this only can it only go one way? Can the vampires only become zombies? Or if a zombie gets enough blood, does it begin to, rejuvenate the body and actually a zombie can eventually turn back into a vampire? That's something pretty cool to think about. I mentioned in book one that the author likes to use the word caress or caresses or caressing, and that she was lucky I didn't count them. Well, this book actually was pretty clear, pretty fine. I came across 2 times that it said the word caress, the root word caress. That was until I got up to page 202, and then something weird happened. It just, there was like a caressing explosion. After that, I came across the root word of caress 11 times in like the last 40 pages. It's not that bad. I've definitely seen worse repetition. I didn't keep track of it, but I definitely noticed there is a lot of cascading in this book. I think my favorite word repetition in this book happens on page 130. In fact, I'm so impressed by how much word repetition is on page 130 that I feel like the author Estella Vasquez Perez is owed a beautiful bouquet. Why are there so many bouquets? It does appear one time on the next page, but 12 times on one page? Really? Okay. In my book roast for book one, I mentioned that the Amara trance is kind of like a date rape drug. but it's more like a date rape spell. And I actually talked about if because Henrietta just forcefully puts the spell on Ivan and forces him to have sex with her. And I said, I wonder if it's okay if a guy just does that to a woman. On page 5, there's essentially my answer, which says, towards the bottom, the Amar trance is the closest vampires can come to mutual love, and not once since becoming intimate with Victor has Suzette requested Ivan to put her under the Amar trance. So apparently Suzette has to request it from Ivan. And it goes on, it says, and Ivan has not asked Suzette to allow him to put her under the trance. So there's certainly some chivalry there involved that says that guys shouldn't force it onto women, but I guess it's okay for the chicks to do it to the guys. Or perhaps it just says something about the character of Henrietta. I'll leave that up for other readers to interpret. Right here on page 5, going into page 6, there's and actually on to page 7, there's some really redundant sentence structure, and it's also really dull. Let me show you what I'm talking about. You see, it's one thing to start your sentences with, James went to the store. James bought some gummy worms. James paid for the gummy worms. James got in the car and drove home. James got home and fed his dog. Blah blah blah. That's not so good. But it's another thing to just continuously tell intimate emotions or feelings. Page 5. Victor feels that discovering his ex-fiancée in the arms of her true love has crippled his heart. Page 5. Victor loves Suzette's passion for her life and her intellect. Page 6. Victor is enthralled by her. Page 6. Victor considers himself undeserving of her passion. Page 6. Victor also feels for Ivan, who has been a true gentleman to him despite being in love with Suzette. Next sentence on page number 6. Victor appreciates and respects that Ivan continues to bestow the gift of his friendship and partnership. Page 6, the next sentence. Victor is comforted with knowing that Ivan finds solace in the loving arms of Henrietta. Then on page 7, Victor refuses to contemplate the day when he will depart from New Orleans and put miles between him and Suzette. Next sentence. What it's supposed to be. Victor cannot fathom nourishing a long-distance romance. I'll come back to that. Page 7. Victor feels it would be cruel for him, blah, blah, blah. And then also on page 7, Victor cannot bring himself to ask her, blah, blah, blah. You get what I'm saying? It's not so good. Now, the reason I said it should be Victor cannot fathom. In this story, there are vampires, there are werewolves, there are demons, there are ghosts, and there's also phantoms. That's right, there's actually phantoms in this story. And one of those phantoms is right here on page 7. Victor cannot phantom. This also happens on page 48 and 49. Let's take a little peek. Page 48. I cannot fathom the agony that all of you had to deal with during my delirium on that forsaken day of my transformation. And then on page 49, I cannot fathom not performing illusions. Being void of magic in my life will destroy my spirit. Also, in the middle of all that Victor this, Victor that, Victor hit somebody with a wiffle ball bat. You've got this one part on page 6 where it reminds us Drake struggles with accepting the retribution of unrequited love, and he despises Henrietta's love for Ivan, and Drake resents that he must extend the full moon truce to Ivan. So in the middle of telling me this and this and this about Victor, you're also going to tell me this, this, and that about Drake. On page 8, we start chapter 2, which talks about the ship, the Ana Luisa, which apparently was sunk by only one hurricane, and it was sunk in the year 1715. I heard a rumor once that it was sunk by by hurricanes, and it was sunk in the year 1721. I guess that was just a rumor. That was inaccurate. I'm just going to assume this is the truth. Well, with that being said, 5 years later, after Victor and Ivan said, "Yeah, we'll hit that shit up next month." 5 years later, they finally decided to hit that shit up. Now, in chapter 3, starting on page 11, it's called The Haunted Sea. I got what I thought was going to be the plot of this book, of this story, which is essentially the inciting incident, which is Victor getting bit by the hellhounds and becoming, like, cursed to go to hell. And then Henrietta and them, they decide to try and save him by making him a vampire, which still keeps his soul damned to hell. So I got to side with Victor on that. Like, that makes no fucking sense. That was a stupid decision by them, not by the author. The characters in the story made a stupid decision. And so now he's stuck as a vampire, and he's got to, quote, fight for his salvation. I was like, oh, okay, so that's the plot of this book. That's cool. I'm glad I'm being told about it, in the first, 15 pages or whatever. I don't have to read, 160 some pages or whatever it was from the first book to figure out the plot of that one. So I was like, cool. That fucking works, right? That turns out to be the plot of the second and third book, I'm guessing. Maybe the trilogy, I don't know. But that's not the plot of this book, because it doesn't get resolved here. You see, on page 68, we get what I'm assuming is supposed to be the plot of this book, but that shit don't check out. Because you see, on page 68, it says, this is a narration talking about Victor. It says, he left New Orleans feeling like a walking corpse, with the only purpose in his life being to rescue his soul from the clutches of the devil. Okay, yeah, I thought that was the plot of the story. But it's saying it as if that's changed. So what is his new motivation? What is it that's pushing the story along? Well, it says, like a rose needs the sun to bloom, Victor needs Julieta for his damned soul to flourish as it fights darkness. Here we go again. So it's all about love. He's trying to hook up with Chocolate Girl. And that's the story. Too bad after he like gets her in the middle of the book, she dies. So that's kind of over. Now let's just keep reading for the second half of the book. After the plot has been concluded, on page 63 in narration it says, the sudden confirmation of feeling love for Giulietta invigorates his soul. And then it even says, falling in love with Giulietta gives Victor hope for his damned soul. Like, he hasn't spoken to her. So, is the love like physical attraction? Like, he saw her and was like, whoa, she's fucking hot. I want to make love to her. He doesn't know her personality. He hasn't spoke to her. Like, how is he in love with her? On page 85, however, it says that attraction is not love. So, how then can he be in love with Chocolate Girl and not even spoken a word to her? In book 1, the author introduces a thing called the Vampiric Code. And that's kind of like the basis of a lot of the drama that takes place in this trilogy. And I talked about the problems with it and the way it's worded. And in this book, the author stays true to what she has already established, which is something I've already explained is problematic. Because in this book, there is the introduction of the character Chocolate Girl. She is a human, and yet she can't love somebody. Chocolate Girl is not a vampire, so she is not bound by the rules of the Vampiric Code. She should be able to fall in love with Victor, as the code is written. On page 17, we get a new power, which is, it says, quote, hoping that he will be heard, Ivan telepathically sends out a distress call, so they can just magnify their thoughts to people. That's neat. We then get some more new powers on page 78. Victor just extends his hand towards the shovel, and the shovel comes to him like Thor's hammer. And then it says, with his hand, he channels the heat from his body to explode a lock open. So he kind of has like touch bombs or something. He can just make things explode. That's quite a power. I'll keep that in mind. Now, in this story, there's a couple of little grammatical errors or sentences that would be better if they're reconstructed. But I will say that it's far, far less than book 1. This is a much more polished book. It's a much more professional book than book 1. That being said, in book number 1, there was an issue where the author was putting the wrong character's name for like taglines. That happens one time in book number 2 on page 199. The tagline reads, Suzette says it should be Valentina. Do you remember all the issues that I brought up about the dangers of sunlight for vampires in book 1? Remember there was the situation with Henrietta, how she was walking around out in the sun and, good afternoon, and all that shit. And it just wasn't a problem. And there's like, moments where they're watching the sunrise and sunset. So it's like really unclear. Like, can they hang out when the sun is just rising and sun setting, but they can't do it in midday, or can they walk around in midday like you know Suzette was? Like, I'm not sure, but in book number 2, on page 27, it says the receding afternoon sun irritates his skin. Talking about Victor the vampire. So he's not so good in the sun, the afternoon sun. On page 28, he then kind of passes out in like a building or a bar or something, and it says the streams of sunlight that filter in from the huge windows soon assault him, forcing him awake, at which point he jumps up and presses himself into the corner. So it like hurts him and stings him, and he's like, "Oh, what the fuck?" And he like jumps away from it. So he can't feel sunlight apparently. Like it's like a problem in the afternoon. And then on page 29, it says that Henrietta glides in wearing a heavy cloak that covers her head to protect her from the morning sun. So she can't hang out in morning sunlight, which is then followed on page 30 about her using her telekinesis or telekinetic powers basically to quote clap the heavy curtains shut because she doesn't like the sunlight. Now compare all of that to what happens on page 89. On page 89, it says, quote, at 3 in the afternoon on Christmas Day, Victor jolts awake. He then basically tells everyone, oh no, where's my sister? We gotta find her. She must be at church. So what do? Well, it says, as they rush into the church of St. Francis. So that they all get ready and they all run out and they run to the church in the middle of the day, 3 in the afternoon. Okay? They ran to this church in the middle of the afternoon. Perhaps it's cloudy though. Perhaps it's not sunny. You know, it said in the first book that if it's real cloudy and rainy, then the vampires can come outside. No, that's not the case. Because it says on page 89, they see the silhouette of their sister sitting in front of the pew, bathed in rays of sunlight tunneling down from a magnificent stained glass window. It then says on page 89, transitioning to page 90, the brilliance of the light prevents Victor from racing to her. It then says Ernesto contemplates his younger sister bathed in the brilliant ray of sunlight. So Victor can run to this church in broad daylight, but once he's inside the church, he can't get into the beams of light coming through the windows. I don't know. Also, the death of his sister was a little too on the nose. I was able to see it coming. She just randomly appeared and was just like buttered up big time to like, appear cool and sensitive and oh, she's so special. And then I was like, oh, she's probably gonna die. On page 117, it says, he, Victor, takes refuge from the warmth of the rising sun in the mausoleum. So can he run around in the sun or not? I mean, I don't know. Perhaps, maybe looking at the sunlight is a problem. or feeling it is a problem. I don't know. On page 201, Suzette says, "Have a drink with me, and let us watch the morning sun's red, purple, and orange rays break through the dark sky." So here she's talking about watching the sunrise. But then back here on page 35, it talks about how Victor needs to hide his eyes from the sunlight. So, I don't know. But while we're here, I'm just going to read you my favorite line in this whole book. It's on page 35. In narration, it says, "His glasses are for mourning his mother, but they also serve to shield his eyes from the sun." You don't say. Now there's some detail repetition. On page 34, it says, "He is grateful that he is not in hell, and his mother did not die mourning his death, and, most importantly, that his mother will never learn that while in New Orleans he became a monster." Then on page 36, it says, "Victor turns a deaf ear on what is said about him, as he finds comfort that the death of his mother has spared her from living with the pain of learning that her son is a monster whose soul is consigned to the devil." Then on page 46, it says, this is Victor talking, "I am comforted that she passed without becoming aware that her beloved son is a monster." Some more repetitive information is on page 34. It says, "His older brother, who is the mayor of Montenegro, is not home to greet Victor because of his civic duties." Then on page 51, it says, "Ernesto, Victor's older brother, is the mayor of Montenegro." So I've heard. There's also some issues with just kind of overtelling. For example, on page 36, going to 37, there's a paragraph that starts on page 36. It says, "3 months after arriving in California, blah, blah, blah." And then it goes on this big paragraph at the top of page 37. There's just a lot of telling. Victor feels this, he can't feel that, it's comparison to this. You don't have to tell us all that. All you would have had to have done was have him get this what is it? This letter. Have him get this letter and just have him like shake his head and then just like stick it in a drawer unopened. Like have me like, see that it's from Suzette, right in the drawer, and we can kind of figure it out. This next paragraph on page 37, it then talks, it kind of goes into this fact that it says Victor's brother, keeps an attentive eye on Victor, and when his brother is not attending to his duties as mayor, he takes the opportunity to question and probe Victor, pointing out on several occasions that outside of his passion and talent for magic, he is not the same man. Why not show us a quick little scene of that? Just, have him, bring it up in some way to Victor. And then you can have Victor respond by saying, "Seriously, brother, this again?" Something like that. And then we could then conclude that this kind of conversation has happened multiple times. On page 38, the information continues basically to be dumped, and it explains that it says, thus, when the post for an ambassador to Mexico opens, Victor takes the job and flees to Mexico. You could have stated that information in the argument. You could have had his brother say something like, look, Victor, we have to, solve this problem. You can't live here forever. And Victor could say, don't worry about my problems. I've already taken care of them. As a matter of fact, I have become the ambassador to Mexico. I'll be leaving soon. Or something like that. I love this. On page 38, in dialogue, it says, silence is the most feared dagger to the heart. No. If you would have read book 1, you would know that Ivan made it very clear that a silver dagger to the heart is what should be feared. And as we all know, silence is golden. In my book roast for book 1, I mentioned how this series is really highlighting a major question, I guess a philosophical question about what exactly is love. It's so convoluted in this story, I can't quite make sense of it. And we actually just kind of make it more complicated in this book. At the bottom of page 39, it says, in dialogue, our damned hearts are still capable of affection, warmth, and desire. And then on page 156, it says, Julieta can only feel affection, chemistry, and deep care for him. Talking about Victor the vampire. But that's apparently not the ingredients for love? I don't understand. Like, okay, affection. So we're talking about like sexual attraction, right? Chemistry. So like friendship. So like they're good together. They can laugh. They think alike. They have good chemistry. They're friendly. And deep care for him. So like love. I mean, if you deeply care for someone, then you're willing to sacrifice for them. You care for them and you want them to be happy. You're willing to be with them and be around them for decades. In the case of like, Suzette and Ivan were together for all those years. But they weren't in love. It makes no sense, man. Also, random question. Why do these vampires keep their names? I mean, they go to all these lengths to try and, quote, reinvent themselves as like their descendants. But why are they all keeping the same names? Like they're not even like the second and the third and Victor Montenegro the fourth. Like they're all the same name. Now, one cool thing is, on page 42, it says, Victor looks at Suzette, and then he utters, quote, you are the orphan who traveled to New Orleans as a casket girl. I'll admit that was pretty cool. Because I, as the reader, got to kind of live vicariously through that situation. And so it was kind of a take back to, oh yeah, back in the day, I remember that. Shit. So that was cool. But I still question if it's necessary to even read the first book. Now from pages 22 to 44, it's really, really sluggish. Like, it's literally just Victor complaining. It's like, man the fuck up, man. And then on page 70, there's a situation where Victor, it, it says compliments of Victor. So Victor gives tickets to this guy named Carlo who has a crush on Chocolate Girl so that he can then go to the performance and see Chocolate Girl with Victor. Like, it's so fucking spiteful and low. Like, it's a major blow to my respect for the character. It's just like, wow, Victor, that's quite, shitty of you. Then you compare this to what happens on page 80, where it says, in narration, donating the treasure to the poor greatly enhances Victor's public image. People pour into San Francisco to see Victor and Julieta perform. You can pretty much guarantee that was Victor's plan. So, he's not doing genuine good deeds. He's doing it so that he can get kicks, basically. He's building himself up in the public forum, and he's getting financial benefits. Because even though he sacrificed that treasure, it's then causing people to come more to his shows and pay for tickets to see him perform. So the money's actually coming back to him. Then lastly, compare that to what happens on page 94, where Carlo is playing a song for Chocolate Girl, and Victor commands the strings of Carlo's violin to pop out of place. In addition to him commanding the doors to lock so that Carlo and Chocolate Girl are trapped on this balcony. At which point, on page 96, Victor comes to save the day, so to speak. And then it says Victor's hand commands the jacket to fly to Carlo, and the jacket crashes against Carlo's face. So, like, it's just so fucking douchey. Like, I literally wrote, Victor sucks. Go Team Carlo. Like, he's an ass. And he's cheating at that. He's a cheating ass. I had some respect ending book 1 for Victor, but leaving book 2, I really don't like him. On page 45, we have chapter 4, which is called Wolf Tower. Wait, didn't I already read that in book 1? It's in this chapter that we learn that, like, lots and lots of years have just passed. Specifically, 25 years have passed. It kind of is a shell shock to the reader. On page 47, Ivan says, what are your plans for the next 25 years? And of course, on the very next page, on page 48, he so eloquently says, what is your plan for the next 25 years? The chapter then ends by saying, for the first time since that infamous day when he escaped the devil's seabed, Victor smiles with happiness. So this motherfucker has been sad and mopey and depressed for 25 years. Bless his soul. On page 46, it says that, like, this is Victor speaking. It says, it angers me that Golden Death uses the Ana Luisa to seduce treasure hunters so he can cash in on their souls to escape the hell that he richly deserves. Why? That just makes him a treasure hunter too. But his treasure is souls of people. Victor, are you saying that it bothers you on like a moral level or something? Then here on page 46, it says, Victor smiles at the delicious irony. The idea of facing off with Golden Death and his damned minions is exciting. Why is it exciting? I mean, up to this point, we have no reason to believe that Victor is any type of warrior whatsoever. He's not in fistfights. He hasn't killed people. He's just some illusionist guy. Then you compare that to what happens on page 128. The dialogue for Victor says, "Out of pity for your wretched soul, I will spare your life. I will spare your life just this one time. Keep your distance from Julieta. If you harm her again, I will personally walk you to the gates of hell." No balls. I dare you. Do it. Be more than just talk. Then on page 225, when Victor and Ivan are confronted by Drake, the werewolf, it says at the bottom, Victor laughs and says, "Sail away, or this will be your watery grave." Man, this bitch is all talk. He's a puss. In this confrontation, Drake and his werewolves pull out swords, and then the vampires pull out guns. They pull out rifles. Why do they need those? I thought we already confirmed that these people have like touch bombs. Like they can just use their body heat to make shit explode. Why didn't they just point at Drake's head and pop that shit? They don't need guns. They can just blow his ass up or something. Or just pop his head. Maybe pop the eyes out of his skull. Hell, if he doesn't want to kill anybody, he could use his fucking explosion hands and blow Drake's fucking kneecaps off. Make him collapse screaming in agony, and then Victor could just be like, "Let's get the fuck out of here." Like a boss. He's like, "Don't get in my way again, bitch, or I'll break your fucking elbows next." No, he just stands there smiling and talking shit. Let's talk about the musician named Carlo. Carlo is really fascinating. His character's his little mini arc is way more exciting than what's going on with Victor. An interesting thing happens. The devil shows up and makes a deal with Carlo. On page 60, Satan says,
"I offer you the entire world as your stage. I will give you the ability to write music that will place you among history's greatest composers. I will give you the stamina to play without exhaustion. You will be written into history as one of the greatest violinists known to man."
so that's the offer. That's what Satan is saying he's going to give Carlo. Carlo then says, "In exchange for what?" At which point, Satan says on 61,
"Your soul.
he says,
I have the power to make your life on earth like heaven in exchange for your soul."
like a good salesman, he continues to push. He says on 61 over to 62,
"Fame will free you from all sacrifices.
he then goes on,
With fame, you will have the power of allurement and hence the desire of women."
so all of those things are what Carlo gets as a reward for the deal. The only thing Satan is supposed to get in exchange is Carlo's soul, right? This is where it gets interesting. Carlo says on 62, "I will agree to sign if you agree to grant me 3 wishes when I request them." That's then followed by something really cool where Satan plucks a quill from the air and stabs Carlo's heart with the quill. It says Satan then pulls the quill out of his heart, and he hands the quill dripping with his blood. So that's cool imagery. So Carlo watches as 3 wishes are written in blood on the contract, right? This is actually really neat because what this does is it actually makes Carlo immortal. Think about it. What this means, when you actually look at the wording, he says, I will agree to sign if you agree to grant me 3 wishes when I request them, not if I request them. If he said if, it would mean that, if he dies, before he grants the 3 wishes, then that's okay. He didn't get to them. But when implies that they will happen. And thus, we're talking about a contract, so I'm, talking, getting down to the legal nitty gritty here. That would imply that if Carlo dies before Satan has upheld his end of the contract and granted Carlo 3 wishes, that would mean Satan has violated the contract, and thus the contract is null and void, and Carlo would get to go to heaven if he's, in right with God. So it would be in Satan's best interest to give Carlo essentially eternal life and keep him alive so that it would give time for Carlo to ask for his 3 wishes. This means if Carlo was smart, he could have just held out. He could have used 2 wishes and then just held out on his 3rd, and he could have lived for years and years and years. This is further elaborated, or alluded to, I should say, on page 120. Here in this situation, Victor appears to be about to kill Carlo. And if Carlo dies, he hasn't asked for his 3 wishes, so Satan will have not held up his end of the bargain, and thus he would have violated the contract, and in theory, Carlo's soul would have gone to heaven instead. So right before Victor kills Carlo, it says, as he is about to stab Carlo in the heart, from the corner of his eyes, he sees 2 ghastly things spring up from the floorboard. The gruesome creatures are not there to protect Carlo, but to encourage Victor's evil act. Now, on its face, that doesn't make sense. On its face, if the creatures are there not to protect Carlo, but to encourage the murder, then that would actually go against the contract, because Carlo would die without getting his wishes. So that would make sense. So what I think is actually happening here is the demons are kind of using like reverse psychology. They're saying, yeah, kill him, kill him. And they're making it look really evil so that Victor then is like, oh, wait a minute. This is evil. This is bad. I shouldn't do it. And thus it actually is helping Carlo stay alive. Because think about it. If Victor actually was going to kill them, or kill Carlo, then why does it say, as he is about to stab Carlo in the heart, the demons appear? Them appearing causes Victor to not do the murder. So by showing up, they stopped the murder. So if they would have just kept their asses in hell, Victor would have done the murder. Then, as you read a little bit further on pages 124, 125, his wishes are all used up. So he uses all 3 wishes. And then something weird happens. At the bottom of 125, a demon says, your last wish is granted. His darkness, Satan, has honored the contract. You must also honor the contract. get back to work and perform. What? That doesn't make sense. He doesn't have to perform. It's not a stipulation that Carlo has to perform. He's already famous. Back on page 62, when the contract is signed, Satan says,
Once you sign, you will be Carlo Finney, world-renowned violinist, courted by women, the envy of musicians, and courted by royals.
So the moment you sign it, boom, you're famous. You'll be able to play wherever you want. You'll have all this ability. It's done. So Satan will have upheld that part of the bargain. And the only thing left is the three wishes. And once he grants the three wishes, everything that Satan has promised in the contract will have been fulfilled. The only thing left will be for Carlo to transfer his soul to Satan. At which point, on page 125, when it says your last wish is granted, you must also honor the contract, get back to work, and perform. That doesn't make sense. The moment that last wish is granted, why doesn't the demon just kill Carlo? I mean, there's nothing left. Satan's already gotten what he needs, so just kill him and get the soul. Or Satan should show up and kill him. Now, of course, Satan eventually does show up and he does kill Carlo. And there is some arguable reason why he didn't kill him early on. And it's because word gets out that Carlo is so successful specifically because of the deal he made with the devil, which inspires other people to make deals and sell their souls. So, I mean, you could argue that, but it's not part of the bargain. It's not in the print. I'm looking at it from that legal standpoint. I can see the benefit, but it's not in print. Now, my boy Craig pops back up in this book just for a second, and he actually gets to take Valentina out on a date, so that's cool. And on page 218, I wrote a little note that says, I fear for my boy Craig, he's about to get used. That's the way it was looking. It appeared that Valentina was just going to use him to, basically see how she felt about Victor. See if she would feel okay on a date with Craig. And then we don't really get to see the date with Craig. It's real glossed over, and it's kind of pointless. I don't know, why he was brought back into the story. I guess it's just for the sake of she was using him to speak in front of Victor and say, oh, hey, Victor, I'm going to go on a date with this guy. Hope you don't mind. I guess to try and plant seeds of jealousy in Victor. I don't know. That's just some trifling ass woman shit. Chapter 10, which is called Buried Gold. Why does that exist? Why then do we have the scene in the next chapter where Victor finds this gold, effortlessly? What's the point? Just to show off powers and oh, he's so selfless. Look, he's giving away money. It's revealed that he's getting all these kickbacks from it, so what the fuck ever. This reminds me of chapter 18 called Baby Carriages. Why does that exist? That's garbage. That shouldn't even be in the story. Is it supposed to show how, morally right and just Victor is or some shit? It's not necessary. It serves no purpose. On page 83, I took a note which says, what I thought was going to be an attempt for a redemption story to reclaim Victor's soul has turned into a competition to get Chocolate Girl. Basically that's all it is at that point. It's just Carlo and Victor trying to hook up with this chick, and it's just like, am I reading the same story? Because like it starts off, we're in a plague, and then it turns into like this Pirates of the Caribbean ghost hunt ship thing, and then all of a sudden it's just like love triangle competition, see who's going to get the girl, and then it jumps into like the present, and I don't even know, like it just what's happening. I love on page 94 after Victor fucks up Carlo's violin. Carlo is just like really smooth, and he's like, "It seems my song was too emotional for my violin," he says with a smile. "You go, Carlo. I was rooting for you, buddy. Go Team Carlo." On page 97, I feel like there's some basically dialogue that's just kind of out of character. There's this character who appears, and he's a demon. He's basically like Baphomet, even though historically Baphomet is supposed to be Satan. It's in the same vein, so we'll roll with it. It's a demon with a goat head. And this demon says on 97, she will never fall in love with Montenegro. Montenegro is in love with your beloved. Montenegro is damned and mutual love is forbidden. Why is he saying that? Like, seriously. Like, think about it. At this point in the story, I mean, these demons, they're working against Carlo. The goal is to get him to use up his wishes so they can get the soul. So why are they telling him something that will, like, embolden him? Like, yo, relax, man. That girl ain't gonna hook up with Victor. You're good. They shouldn't be saying that. They should be tempting him and deceiving him. What they should be saying is what's on page 98, where it says, "She will never fall in love with you, Carlo. While alive, Giulietta will be bound to Montenegro by her gratitude for his support, her admiration for his standing on the international stage, and his captivating illusions." Now that, one, is a contradiction of what was on the previous page, and two, that's actually what he should be saying. That makes sense, because that is it forces Carlo into thinking about alternate options. He's saying, look, as it is, you ain't ever getting with Julia. She's dedicated to Victor. Unless you want to use up one of your wishes. Which brings up an interesting thing. Carlo then kind of explains that he says, "She inspires me to create a melody beyond my inspiration. I desperately need her by my side. My heart demands it. My soul has no comfort without her. She is my violin." He then says, "I want her light to inspire me. I need her by my side as my muse." So he's saying he wants this, but the demon has to clarify. He says, "Is that a wish?" So he doesn't grant it immediately. He has to specify and says, "Well, is that a wish?" Now, later in the story, he kind of raises the violin over his mouth, and then when he drops the violin, she collapses, at which point we learn that her soul was taken and put in the violin. But we can assume that when he hides his mouth, that's him like whispering to Satan that that's what he's wishing for. And so, in that situation, the demon's like, "Is that a wish?" He doesn't grant it immediately. Later, he has to actually say, "I wish for this," for it to happen. And then it's then confirmed on page 123 when it says, "You had your wish. You lived with her spirit for several days. And then it says again on page 124, you had your wish with her. I bring this up because on 124, it then says, Carlo says, I want the music that she and I created returned to me. So again, he's saying the word want. He's not saying I wish for it, he's saying I want it. And then this demon just grants is it a wish? I feel like that's kind of a break of protocol. Because the next thing he then says on page 125, I wish that my burns are not visible to anyone. And then it's granted. On page 101, it says in dialogue, bloodletting therapy slowly died under the suspicion that it was bloodletting that killed George Washington. In this situation, in this dialogue, Suzette is talking to Victor. She's telling Victor this as if Victor doesn't know. He knows. On page 92, it says, Victor is glad that he drank fresh animal blood at the slaughterhouse earlier that day. Bloodletting is no longer in practice, and Victor tires of hunting for rodents in undesirable neighborhoods, which has resulted in Victor frequenting slaughterhouses for his nutritional needs. So yeah, he knows. You don't have to tell him. But it's interesting, nice little historical tidbit about George Washington. This brings up an interesting point. I think it's really cool. Okay, it's really cool. It's good that the author has acknowledged this situation, that the bloodletting is not a thing anymore, and it's an example of how times are changing. Because these characters are basically immortal. They're living for all these years. So they have to, see how times change. Now, instead of the bloodletting, they have to go to these slaughterhouses for their blood. Much later in the story, on page 199, there's a reference to what used to be done in the past. It says in dialogue, in the late 16th century, our ancestors began to sponsor orphaned young ladies to have a night at the opera, which was intended to introduce them to cultural arts and to young men of well standing for marriage. In this century, we continue the custom. We invite young ladies to the opera and purchase their elegant gowns, just as our ancestors did. But instead of introducing them to young men of well standing, we give them 4-year scholarships to the university of their choosing. So that's really neat. That specific thing highlights another change that has had to take place over time. First, in the first book, slavery was a really big component of that story. They, all the different plantations. Suzette had plantations, Ivan had plantations. It's just a thing. And yet, in this book, we cross that line of when slavery was abolished, and there's just no mention of it. It's like in this book, which has a plague in it, ironically, slavery, the topic of slavery, is just abandoned. It's just overlooked as if it's like avoided, like it's the plague. I was really surprised that there was no mention of how Suzette or Ivan had to adjust their companies of, growing tobacco and sugar without slaves. I feel like that should have been mentioned. But more importantly, there's an issue in here where you have present times, right? like the modern day America specifically, where these characters, which I know they're like immortal and they've come from really historical, like old times, but they're in the present now. And yet, despite them being in the present, they keep kissing the hands of women, that shit. And it seems like if someone fucking farts, it's like, this calls for a celebration. Bring drinks. Let's toast. And they're always clinking drinks together, and this for good health, and this for this, and let's toast to that. People don't do that anymore. Like maybe two people will crack open a Budweiser and you know, yeah, let's win this fucking game, bro. you know, but we don't have that elegancy of clinking champagne glasses, and it's just not really a thing anymore. And even if it does happen, just for like old time's sake, like it happens way too much in the book. In addition, there's also like outdated dialogue. When you're writing dialogue, you don't want your words to sound robotic. I want to go to the store. I would like you to be at my house in just a few minutes. You don't want to sound just like a fucking robot. People mix words. Instead of could not, it becomes couldn't. Or instead of should have, it becomes should have. Or instead of I am, it's I'm. That's just it's what we do in our modern day language. Now, when you're writing dialogue for like the 1700s, you can actually get away with the more robotic, you know, dialogue because they spoke more properly. That's fine. You know, I would love to go to the opera with you. That's fine. That's totally fine. But in the modern day, you have situations like on page 209 where people in, let's just assume, I don't know, when was this book written? You have people in the year in 2017, right? 2017. You've got people saying in dialogue, quote, I am fine. I am in town to visit Victor, and I was wondering if you have any blood you can spare. And people saying things like, he is doing great. He does not know I am in town. Who talks like that? And you can't argue, oh, well, they come from an old time, so they talk old timey. No. If you live up in the north, let's say you're in like New Hampshire or something, and you move down to like fucking Alabama for like 7 years, just like 5 or 7 years, and then you move back up to New Hampshire, all the people in New Hampshire are going to pick on you and say you sound like a southern hick. And you're going to be like, no, man, I'm not gonna sound like no southern hick. I'm from the north. I'm a Yank. He just naturally picks it up. People are actually very quick to adjust. They will pick up speaking very, very quickly. That's why learning a language is best. The best way to learn a language is to be immersed in the language. Just go to the country that you want to learn the language of, and just hang out with the people and just talk with them about whatever, and you'll pick it up. So, with these people living in the modern day society, they should speak normal, like the way we do. They should have modern slang. They should have modern sentence structure and the cadences of it's just outdated. It's not right. It's from the different time period. On page 215, you even have Valentina, who is a modern living person. They're not a vampire at all. And she's like, I am so grateful. Really? Really? Okay, whatever. On page 121, man, that whole scene of Carlo, that shit's sad, man. I drew a little sad face. I definitely gotta give some kudos to the author on page 124 and 125. There's some really clever bait by demons to try and instigate wishes from Carlo. When one's like, because like Carlo's face is all fucked up, and he's like, "What will you say to Julieta when she asks about your sudden disfigurement?" And that is pretty much immediately followed with him, the demon, saying, "I must say, your audience will be too distracted by your pitiful facial burns to really appreciate the music that Julieta and, of course, you created." So, I mean, that's good. There's an issue that I found in this book and also found in book one. I don't think I mentioned it, but I'm just gonna say it now. When you're writing a book, you gotta watch out for just like useless dialogue. For instance, on page 127, "Thank you for all your care. Good night, Julieta. I will call on you at dusk tomorrow night. If you need anything at any time, I pray you will contact me." "Yes, thank you. Good night, Victor." Like, really? Like, what is that? In fact, that whole section right there on 126 to 127, like, what's the point, really? In book number one, there's this interesting thing where we can actually see the word for word thoughts of Valentina in like the future scenes or the present scenes, I should say. We can actually see into her mind and see her word for word thoughts. But those word for word thoughts are in quotations. In this book, however, we don't see that for Valentina at all. But on page 155, we have a situation with Victor where we have essentially dialogue, but it's not in quotations, it's in italicized. And it says, "I will propose when Julieta knows my truth." And then the tag is, "he repeats to himself." So, is that internal dialogue? Are we seeing word for word what Victor is now thinking? Interesting. On page 116, it says, as it's talking about Victor, "As he contemplates her listless body, his eyes become red with rage." You gotta be specific with that. I mean, it becomes red with rage. Like, is that like metaphorical? Like, he's metaphorically, his eyes are becoming red with rage? Like, perhaps, are they glowing red? Like the color of his eyes went from gray to glowing red? Or is he like so angry he's crying and he's got blood tears, so his eyes are red from the blood tears? You gotta be pretty specific on that manner. Page 161. Victor's gray eyes turn fiery red and his fangs creep out. So they're glowing? 161. Victor's eyes return to gray and his fangs recede. Oh, so they do actually glow. Took us about 50 pages or whatever, but we got it. I like how on page 194, it's talking about the incident. It says, "When Victor prevented a wall weighing a ton from crashing down on her, blah blah blah." So it's talking about this wall potentially crashing down on Valentina. And then it says, "When she thinks about the incident, a sense of dread crashes down on her." I see what you did there, and I don't like it. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and talk about what is arguably the biggest problem of the book, and that is the earthquake that happens. I understand that the earthquake is important because it sets up the event of the wall of bricks toppling over and killing Chocolate Girl. I get that. But it's like, why do these big apocalyptic things keep happening? Now, you could argue that it's a side effect of living an immortal life. In a normal life, you might see one traumatic thing happen. And so, if you live a long life and you have, hundreds of years under your belt, you might see multiple big traumatic things. So I can get that. But in the first book, there's a big fire, and then there's the plague that happens. And then in this book, the plague ends. And then there's this big earthquake, which is like the equivalent of, the first fire, because it turns into this thing of like the way Suzette was like trying to help everybody, like when the plague hit and stuff. Like it's mirrored in this book for Julieta, the way she wants to help everybody. After the fire, like they were trying to help people, and then when the plague hit, they were trying to help people. And like in this one, when the earthquake hits, there's this scene on 145 where Julieta's like, we must help a mother locate her lost child, help the wounded, help the mayor organize the bread lines. I need to help. I must help. It just seems a little forced. It seems a little just over the top. And then chapter 17 is called Inferno. Another fire happens, and you have this big ass fire. On page 149, it says, communicating to the rest of the world the dire need for food is slow and difficult. So, to ward off famine, Victor uses telepathy to reach out to his fellow night creatures and implores them to exercise their political connections to stress to the world the monumental need for food. My little note just says, Satanists unite! Exclamation point. It's like, yeah! We're the good guys. Really? Like, vampires and werewolves are, this trilogy is just setting up like they're all just misunderstood. They're all really, really good people. They all just want to help. Why is it I have to literally turn to Satan himself, like the devil, to find any true villainy? Like, all the vampires, the werewolves. I mean, you could argue maybe Golden Death, the ghost, is villainous. But, I mean, he's really just minding his own business. He's just a ghost sitting down there at the bottom of the sea. They stumbled in on him, and he's like, yo, you're trespassing. I'm taking your soul. So, I mean, Carlo is just the same as Drake. When Carlo steals Julieta's soul temporarily, or when Drake is willing to kill Ivan, they're just doing it for love, What's wrong with love? Why are these creatures of the night and of darkness whose souls are damned to hell, why are they like these good guys? Why with like superpowers? They're basically superheroes. And so what this means is, right here in the middle of the book, when this earthquake and then fire happens, the plot of the story, like the story itself, is just like it's just like put on hold. Like, time out, yo. Everybody hold up. Story, hit the brakes. We got this earthquake. We gotta deal with it now. Vampires with superpowers assemble. All of a sudden, the creatures of the night who were supposed to be damned to hell turn into superheroes to save the day, apparently. I mean, they don't really show it in the story, but essentially that's what the story is saying is happening. And it's just like the plot has just come to a screeching halt, and now it's the characters trying to survive. And it's just like, what is happening? I'm really interested to see what giant calamity is going to happen in the third book. Probably a tsunami. Maybe it's going to be a bad snowstorm. Probably a hurricane. I bet. That's my guess. It's a fucking hurricane. They're going to get on a ship and they're going to go out to sea to get some treasure and they're going to get hit by a fucking hurricane. That's my guess. I haven't read a single word of the third book, so I might be totally wrong, but that's my guess. It's a fucking hurricane. That pretty much sums up this book. Again, this is Montenegro, Book 2, Dark Serenade, by the author Estela Vasquez Perez. If you do want to buy the book, you can follow the link below. I guess that's all I got. Oh, wait a minute. Alright, so before I go, it's time to announce what the official score is. Estela Vasquez Perez is the new San Francisco champion. She has dethroned the author Amy. And let's see how many San Franciscos are in this book. I told you to make a guess. Do you remember it? Let's see if you got it right. If you guessed that there were 31 times that the name San Francisco appeared in this book, you were wrong. There was only 30 times. Beat the record by 10 points. Who's going to be the next San Francisco champion? Bye.